All right, so hello and welcome to the second in what is turning into a weekly series of video live streams. This week we're going to concentrate primarily on the X3 from Cantar. Before we get into that, some wrap up from last week. You know, we tested the Zoom F8, we did put it in a freezer. It was a very unfair comparison to directly compared to the Sound Devices 788. It was effectively identical in terms of timecode, it also performed very well when compared to other recorders. In terms of word clock accuracy, just to wrap that up. Yeah, we certainly didn't mean to single any single manufacturer out. Both are excellent machines. So also last week, just some news, 688 firmware version 2.01. It's especially important that you update to the 688 2.01 firmware if you are using the SL6. It corrects a bug by lowering the output level of the associated receivers in the SL6. Previously, people had been complaining about distortion because it forced those receivers into line level mode and at a high level, and so now I think it's lowered to 6 dB. By the way, off camera is Paul, so I may look this way and I'll be looking at Paul. So Paul, just sort of say hello to
Hello,
people.
everybody.
All right. Other news: the KTEC Stingray harness was released. What do we know about the Stingray harness? Shipping.
It's shipping.
People really like it. I think it's a better mousetrap. Also shipping is the Sennheiser AVX digital wireless, which I saw a demo of at NAB for people who are doing relatively straightforward, just need a couple of wireless as part of like a video content for a website or something like that. I think it's pretty fantastic stuff. Operates up in 1.9 gigahertz. Basically configures itself. For sure we'll be featuring them on one of these weekly video casts. All right, so the Cantar X3. I wanted to take a different tact with showing the Cantar X3. Rather than sort of like turn it around and show all the inputs and the outputs and all of that stuff, which we've all seen. We've done a video, other people have done videos like that. I wanted to take a very, very specific approach, which comes from my personal experience. I've been involved with Aaton and Cantar. I've been involved with their cameras and been involved with Cantar specifically for 12 years, 13 years since they first came out with the X1. And, there's one thing over and over again that comes up, which is that you sit down, I think at a Sound Devices recorder or a Zaxcom recorder, you can see it, and basically, all of the controls are in front of you, and within about 10 minutes you can figure out most of the machine. Aaton is a company that takes design very, very seriously. Their cameras the design of their cameras were inspired by the way that a cat can balance on a person's shoulder. So that's the design aesthetic for their cameras. You can imagine that they applied that same design aesthetic to the recorders. And they really came out with something very, very unique, but I think also pretty intimidating to somebody that's used to the usual paradigm of a recorder. And so I wanted to take some of that away. I wanted to pretend, not that I'm recommending that this is what you do, but if you were called in to replace somebody on a job that was using a Cantar, what would you do to set it up? So what are the 4 things or 3 or 4 things that you do to any recorder to feel at least like you can fake it to the first shot? You have to figure out how to turn it on. You have to figure out how to set the time code. That's usually the first thing I do when I turn on a recorder, is set the time code. You have to figure out how to set the inputs and the outputs, and you have to figure out how to set up the metadata. So that's what I'm going to walk people through on the X3. So let's do that. All right, so here is the machine right here. I will go through a brief overview. It's got 8 mic inputs. Those inputs are all up here. You can see it's got 4 line inputs. They are 5-pin XLRs on the line inputs, and in fact there's 5 pins on some of the mic inputs here. The trims are here for the mic inputs, and it's got a couple of 8 AES inputs. It's got 4 AES 42 inputs. It's got 32 Dante tracks, and 32 Dante inputs, I should say, and outputs, and 24 tracks. So there's also, I should go over the way that you interface to the machine, the way that you talk to the machine, is really through this, what they call the crown knob. This is a holdover, I'm going to say, from the Nagra and even the Stellavox, but they've expanded it. So like those analog recorders, you had your stop. They have pause, they have half moon record, which is sort of the test position of the old Nagra selector record. The but then down here, but they've expanded it. Play, so you have like all of these main menu settings. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So that's the sort of like the main way that you're going to get to the different modes of the machine. In there is a kind of encoder or a jog wheel. And then there's another selector switch on the left-hand side, which mainly deals with presets, and it too has its own encoder. So in order to turn the machine on, you have to be in stop. And I don't know if you guys can see this. I'm having a hard time seeing the monitor, but yeah. So right there is sort of the indicator that shows you where you're at, and then what you're actually pointing to is on the outside. So I'm pointing to the square, which is, of course, stop. And the on button is here on the top. Let me do it that way. So turn it on. And it comes to life. And it boots up. It takes like 10 seconds or so to boot up and fully come back from a cold start. So we'll let it do that. All right. Now, the first thing it says is timecode generator switch, timecode drift, audio timecode reset. So that's just saying it's been off and it's coming back online, and that it sensed that its own timecode generator has drifted away from, I suppose, word clock. But in any case, there's no action. We just say escape to close. Then if you see over here, it says new day detected. Do you want to start a new day? So this is interesting because this sort of goes to the way that it organizes files. It organizes files at the top level with the project name, and then within each of those projects is the day. Now, it's asking you, do you want to start a new day, because our industry has been known to work past midnight. And so obviously if you're coming back from like a second meal or something and you turn it on, it's not going to want to put it into a new dailies folder. And so it asks you politely. For our purposes, we will say yes. And the day immediately changes. Okay, so there's a couple of things to do with timecode. First of all, I mentioned that it has an internal clock. And so if I just want to jam timecode, all I have to do is hit oh, by the way, this blue button, and there's another one underneath here. These are called shift buttons. And so you see all of these sort of function buttons along here. This one's actually like a typical menu up, down, left, right thing. Here's OK and escape. And then you have all of these F1, F2, F3, 4, 5, and 6 buttons. Those are all the different ways that you can get it to do stuff. Notice, I don't know if you guys can see this, but right here it says Timecode Jam. And so if I just sort of shift and then that, system jam, shift and then timecode jam, system jam requested, and it says system jam OK, and it automatically jams to the time of day. So that's it. I'm now jammed. Now, there are some people that like to do time after call. That's what I used to like to do. Partially so you knew when lunch was and all the other stuff. And to do that, there's actually a timecode setting menu. So again, I take that crown selector. And it's not that I've completely memorized all of this stuff. If you look along the left as I moved, I get to the different menu parameters. And so that's where I can set my timecode. So by the way, just while I'm passing through it, so you can see I'm using the crown here. This is my sample rate and all that other good stuff. This is my timecode rate. But if I was syncing to external timecode, that's where that selection would be. So internal crystal temperature control crystal oscillator or external. We'll leave it on internal for now. And I can set operator timecode. And let's just say that since let's call our call time at 2 o'clock, so it's now 2:15. So let's go crazy and go 0:15 if that's what I wanted to do. And I've now set the timecode to 00:15. If I go back to stop, we can see it, and it even says It even says OTC 00 hours and 15. And if I want to go back to time of day, I just do that. And we're at system time. All right, so that's time code. We'd be ready to jam the slates. Camera department would be happy. Now let's deal with our inputs. So again, by the way, this screen that I keep blowing past is my Cantar status. It's telling me everything is okay. Oh, is that? And it's because I keep hitting the keyboard. Interesting. We'll get to the keyboard in a few minutes. All right, so my inputs. I move over to what's called in-grid routing. It is number 5 on the selector switch, but you don't really have to know what the numbers are. You just sort of get a feel for it. It says it right there. And here is my input grid. So you see here it's 1 to 24. Those are my tracks. And then these are my inputs 1 to 8. So I have a couple of ways of selecting this. Let's say I was feeding this from a Cooper mixer or any mixer. I would want all of my ISOs to be 1 to 8, let's say, for example. And so I'd want them all to be line inputs 1 to 8. And so to do that, I start with track 1 and then input source 1. And I would make it line 1. And I'd go to all the way down. By the way, you can also do this. I'd want to blow out that preset. So I would say remove. And I would go down and line 2, and so on and so forth. Blow that away. And I don't know, I hope you guys can see what I'm pushing, right, to do this. Okay, and I'm going to remove that assignment and go down 1 and make that line 3. Everybody with me? If I was hooking that up to a mixer and I had my line ins all sort of arranged here, that's what I would do. That's the typical thing I would do. But you know, the Cantar doesn't have to operate with an external mixer. We have faders up here. These become our trim pots. So I can do all kinds of interesting things. For example, let's switch this back to you know, mic 1 so we can get some meters moving. So that's going to be mic 1. My options here, by the way, are mix left, mic 1. If I'm doing MS pairs, it could be MS mic 1, line 1, digital 1, AES 42 1. Notice the kind of funny abbreviations. Digital 1 is D, and AES 42 is A, and Dante. And I can assign any Dante track. So unlike the other things, which are sort of fixed as a like 1-to-1 ratio, Dante, Dante, I can assign anything to. So I'll go back to 1. There we go. But really, I'm going to make this mic 1. Now, just out of curiosity, I would like to show you that each track can have more than one source assigned to it, and it just kind of molts them together. So I could, for example, also assign mic 2 to track 1 if I wanted to. I don't know why I would ever want to do that, but just to show you, just to give you a sense of why you get a grid instead of just a line across, that's why. Everybody with me so far? All right, and so then I can also assign things to the mix. Now again, I'm sort of going through this fast, I think, but you know, it's not like I have it all memorized. I get this help screen, and I should really talk about the screen. Aaton was acquired by Transvideo, which makes gorgeous wireless and wired video monitors, and I think the acquisition really benefited the Cantar. This screen is absolutely gorgeous. You know, one of the things that I think intimidated people about the X1 and the X2 was the kind of rotary LCD screens. I thought that they were brilliant because that's sort of psychologically how we think about audio, but it made it kind of obtuse because you couldn't get this you know, basically full language on the screen. Okay, so I am, each one of these tracks is hard assigned to these faders. That will change, but right now these control a mix, and so one of the things that I can do is assign these to a mix. So that is, if I do F, you'll see here, that's how it's being panned. So if I want to pan it to the left, and you know, it's a little bit opposite of North American standards. Left is red. I hit F4. If I want it to be centered, I hit F5, and so that's the combination of red and green and C, and whoops, right is F6. No assigning, is just sort of making sure there's an X there. So I'll assign it to the left track, the left mix, sorry. And so on and so forth. And then typically what you do to sort of get it out of the way of these 10 faders is assign your mix track to track 11. Now, you don't have to do it that way. You can certainly make your mix track track 1, and then just remember that you have to keep that fader up, or else you won't have a mix. So it's entirely up to you. I can also name this configuration. This configuration we've called 8 mics plus mix. So all of these things are kind of presets. And remember, my preset crown is here. So as I rotate this preset crown on the left, my configuration changes. So I can make as many presets as I want. So one preset might be my Cooper mixer preset, which is the 8 line inputs. The next preset might be my over-the-shoulder preset, which would be, you know, mics, and then I'd have access to the faders. So all of those can be made and named, which is simply doing that, and I would either type on the keyboard, which any USB keyboard will do, but we use this one, and yeah, like that. Whoops. Shift Okay, and I'm sure there's a keyboard shortcut for it. And there we go. Is my caps lock on? Maybe. Yes. Okay. So that's how you route inputs. Let's just take a quick look at how you change gain. If I go back to my test record screen, which is up here, my half record, you can see that this is my microphone here. And of course, my trim is here. I have a little PFL button there, and that's where I can change the parameters of that input. So each input, you can select phantom power. You have a limiter. I can invert the phase, which is particularly helpful depending on how some will wire their lavs, which is another topic for another video. And I can also change the, there's a roll-off filter. So I can invoke a roll-off filter here. We have not added digital EQ. I'm not sure that that's actually available yet. But I'll have to check on that and report back next week. And so that's how I change those parameters. So for line, for example, if I wanted to change my line parameter, those buttons are here. And solo line 2, and then that gain is the jog wheel here. So that's, that, I don't know if you guys can see, but we're sort of coming from a mix pre here. But you have, so that's a little bit non-obvious because these only control the mic inputs, but these control the line inputs. Okay, so that's my inputs settings. So now I'll go over outputs. Again, jog wheel, and I'm looking for something that says, you would think it says output grid routing, but it actually is headphone out maps. And it's a little confusing just in the sense that this is actually all of the output maps. And so this is number 6. Yes, number 6. So there's sort of 3 main screens in setting number 6, and think of them all as the output map. And I can sort of flip between them. I'm looking here, so this is my headphones, and we'll go over that in a second. Next up is my line outputs, and then finally my AES outputs. And AES outputs also affect the last 8 outputs of your Dante. While we're talking about Dante, the first 24 Dante outputs are your 24 tracks, and the last 8 Dante outputs are your AES outputs. So back to headphone. Yeah, so all of these are presets, and so you make your favorite headphone modes. You can sort of have different settings. So let's say, this is my mono mix, and you make your favorite headphone modes. My mix in both of my ears. Again, these sort of presets apply. Have different. If I wanted to hear stereo, I suppose I could. So let's say, this is my mono mix. Right, that would be. Left in my left ear and right in my right ear, but this being a mono world for dialogue recording at the moment, we'll do mono, and that's my preset for that. Let's say I wanted to hear all of my tracks in mono, or let's get a little crazy and we'll just alternate for giggles. We'll make that my track 1 into my left ear. Track 2 is in my right ear, track 3 is in my left ear, track 4 is in my right ear, and so on. The way this works is these are your mixes, these are your tracks, they have T in there. Is that reading on camera? Maybe. Mics 1 through 8, lines 1 to 4, AES digital 1 to 8 there, AES 42 1 to 4, and Dante. And so on. And again, I can sort of name my presets So we can call this, something like track stereo, something like that. Track stereo, and that's that. And so on. So really flexible in terms of headphone routing. You can have as many favorites as you want. You have solos here for mics, so you don't have to make a solo for everything. You have solos for your tracks here, your first 10 tracks up here, so you don't have to make a favorite for that. But you can certainly make any combination of headphone mixes that you want with your presets. Moving on, we're going to move next onto line output maps. Now, this is a little bit confusing for me just because there's a couple of different layers that are going on. These are your outputs, line outputs 1 to 8. Each one of those line outputs has its own preset. So, for example, let's say I wanted line output 1 to go to my boom operator. I would, I've conveniently set this up a little bit for right now, but I would dial in a preset that I've already made called Boom Talkback 1. Now if I want to edit that configuration, I hit my OK button, and now I can edit it. And that shows me a couple of other sources, which is interesting. We all know the mix and the tracks and the mics and so on and so forth. But what's opened up here is our 2 different talkback paths. And those are controlled here. It conveniently is labeled talk 1 and then the number 2 there. And as I push them, it'll even sort of tell me what's active. But let's say I've decided to make talkback 1 talk out to my boom operator 1. And I've decided to make talkback 2 talk out to my my second boom operator. So we're going to make a preset for each one of those. So let's say my first boom operator, he or she is the kind of boom operator that only wants to hear their mic. They don't want to hear the mix. They don't want to know what phasing is going on, which is fair enough. We can dial that in, and so we'll clear everything off, and there's a handy preset for shift. And do you want to clear this configuration? Sure, we'll clear it. It's live television. Do you want to clear? OK to accept? Yes. OK, hang on. I guess it's not going to clear it. All right, we'll just do it manually. So we will clear out what we don't want, and we're going to give this boom operator just their microphone, like that. And now when I talk to them, only they will get it, and it goes out to mic 1. We're going to save this preset, and we do that by doing that. And now it shows us there, talkback 1 and mic 1. We're going to go down to the next one, and we're going to rename this one. We're going to call this talkback 2. So if I want to rename it, Shift and OK, and we're going to call this boom 2. Backspace, backspace, backspace. And oops, we'll call it boom, just to be consistent, I suppose, TB2. That's perfect. OK, so let's try this again. Boom, TB2. Done. OK, and we'll clear out. So let's say they are the kind of boom operator that wants to hear the whole mix. We'll give them the mix track, and we will give them talkback 2. And so now I can talk to them privately, like that. OK. So on and so forth, right on down the line. If you're feeding a backup recorder, go to the next one, and you can have your next 2 line outputs be whatever combination of outputs that you want. I think you guys get the idea. Now, I can hear some questions. I sent some questions, which is, OK, great. I have 2 talkback paths, and I'm now talking to my two boom operators, or however I want to do that. How do I actually slate the tracks? And that, if I go back to my test record, you can hit Shift and any of the talkback buttons. And now we see talk1 active to tracks only. So that's actually like they've kind of snuck in a third path that way, which I think is super cool. And speaking of talkback, there is an external mic available for talkback, and they've done something really cool with the headphone jack, which is they've wired it along the, I suppose it's the iPhone standard, iOS standard. So tip ring ring sleeve, so that you can wire up your own headset with a mini jack, but it's one connection for both stereo headphones and microphone, which I think is pretty cool, and still maintaining compatibility with stereo headsets. All right, so back to my output maps. We've done headphones. We've done line outs. AES works the same way with presets, so you have a pretty large number of possible presets to play with. So you're not going to run out of presets anytime soon. I've never actually gone past 8. So 26 presets between AES and line outputs. You'll be just fine. All right, so inputs, outputs, metadata. Go back up to my sort of pre-record mode. Metadata, it's right there. Just hit OK. You can do it cell phone style, 1980s cell phone style, or get a fancy USB keyboard and you can type. Let's back out of that. There we go. No. Interesting. I wonder. There we go. No. Fascinating. There we go. You can type whatever metadata you want. There's a funny thing going on where the caps lock, I don't know if people can see this, but this is actually fascinating to me. The caps lock is actually reversed. Can people see this, Jared? Anyways, it's a funny little quirk, I suppose, with this keyboard. And the scene metadata won't take in lowercase letters. So I have to make sure that I am able to only enter in capital letters. Is that actually true? Yes, that is actually true. It doesn't let me enter in lowercase letters. Anyways, so let's call this scene 154. I hit enter, take 1. I could make it whatever take I want. By the way, naming tracks is, if I highlight this purple button, and again, I don't need a keyboard to do this, I can really go to town and name all of the stuff, all of the track names if I want. Beyond that, it's just a matter of going into record, and that is the record crown there. So there's that, and definitely letting me know that I have made it record to something that doesn't exist. Let's go back to our audio file browser, and I guess I have to refresh, right?
Yeah.
So F5 is refresh, there it is, and we get that error message that the second media doesn't exist. And I can edit metadata in the screen by F4. Again, I haven't memorized this stuff. It's right there, and that's where I'm going to edit it. If I want to verify and just see what's on the other media that I'm handing in, that is done. Escape. Yeah. That is done up here, so I don't have to only look at the SSD. I can look at any of the media. So let's look at SD1 and I suppose refresh. That's interesting. SD1. Ah. There we go. So there are my files. All right. So that is, I think that's all the ground that I wanted to cover now. You know, as far as like the goes intos and the goes outas, you know, that we've made a video, other people have made videos. Those things exist. I really just sort of wanted people to get over the intimidation factor. I suppose I should go over the faders, and we can actually do a mix of something. Here, that's annoying me, so let me get rid of the, let me get rid of that SD card thing. So we're going to go to down here to my session, and we're going to get rid of the SD card. And we're going to disable that, so that way that won't quite give us a hard time. Go back to our test. And we're going to record. Here's our mix. This is making the mix. You can see here we're recording that mix track on track 11, so with all of the faders down. Track 11 is, you know, effectively mute, but as soon as I bring up a fader, that's how that works. And yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of compactness, it doesn't get more compact than this. It's a very, very elegant machine. Any questions? How are we? Oh, holy cow! We got lots of questions. Nope, still looping back. We've restarted the stream. Any questions?
That's us.
Oh, this is all us. All right. How are we doing?
Good. That's a good half hour. We can kill it if we can end it if it's long.
All right. Well, anybody have any questions? They can email me. I hope we're still broadcasting. Okay. You're listening, Joe, right? Okay, good. My email is peters@gothamsound.com, peters@gothamsound.com. Email me any questions. I want to follow up on the on a couple of things. I want to see if EQ has been set up, and there was one other thing I thought that we want to follow up on. And so coming up next week is the PIX 970. We have something really cool to show. It is Will, one of our rental employees, had an idea for a way to push metadata from the Boom Recorder to the PIX 970 or to the 970 automatically. And obviously this doesn't apply to everybody, but the way he did it, I hope will open people's eyes. So we're going to show that, and we'll interview him next week. So until then, email me your questions, and thanks for tuning in.